Hello and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcasts, the Clackmannanshire edition. I've got my co-host Lynn Dugan with me today, and we have been on location to film an event that took place in Alloa.
We were down at the Speirs Centre, Alloa Library, part of their Book Week events, and we went to see an author, Stuart McHardy, talking about his new book, Scottish Geomythography. It was really interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Stuart is a prolific author. He's got about 40 books. He describes himself as a writer, historical scholar, poet, musician, folklorist, lecturer. So we went along to see him talk at the library. And the library hosts lots of different events like this where they have invited speakers come in and talk about not just books, but maybe interests of theirs. So it's always worthwhile checking out your local library to see what's going on.
Definitely. We went last year to the Book Week and saw a couple of really good talks. So we've turned up again this week. Very welcoming space. Fascinating talk from Stuart. So we'll put the link in the notes to the publisher, Lewis Press. So if you want to order any of Stuart's books, you can do. And he promised us that this one would be out before Christmas.
Stocking filler.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for inviting me. I should start off by saying what geomythography is. And it's an approach to the past that concentrates on place through time. And what we seek to do with the geomythographical process is we seek to understand cultural continuity and what has come through over time. And in that respect, there are stories that are going about, that are still told in places in Scotland, whose origin seems to be thousands of years ago, literally. Now, this, up until recently, would have been a kind of controversial thing to say, but there was some work done a few years ago at Durham University where they reckoned that they were showing that oral tradition could hold on to ideas for 5,000 years or so. And I was mentioning this when I was doing a lecture tour in Australia a few years back, and somebody said, "That's nothing." So, what they found is that there's material that has come down through oral tradition within Koori culture, that's the Aboriginal culture of Australia, that they can show is 30 to 40,000 years old. That is because they talk about wombats that were basically the size of the roof, kangaroos that were 15 feet tall. And of course, when you're educated Westerners turn up in Australia and start hearing this thing, "Oh, England's savages," they're making it up, till they started finding the fossilised bones of these things. And that led to an actual new classification of animals called the protodons, just to cover these ancient marsupials. And the people in Australia never had right. Okay, they have got what they could call a grammar of ornament. They tend to tell the stories and draw pictures at the same time. So the pictures help them remember as such, but they didn't have writing. And they're preserving factual stuff, right, for 30 to 40,000 years. And just the other year, is a perfect example of this. The BBC were doing a documentary on the Nessa Brodgar, which most of you know about up in Orkney. And as usual, one of the questions that came up was, how did they move these 20-ton boulders? So they got a whole bunch of keen young folk and ropes and rollers, and they're having an awful trouble moving them. And there was a man standing at the back, and he comes to us and says, "By the way, we were always told that they didn't use that, they used seaweed." So they tried it. 5,000 years ago. The only way he could know that was because he'd been told by his granny, he'd been told by her granny, he'd been told by her granny, and so far back. And it being the BBC, and fronted by a gentleman who we will not name, but you all know who I mean, they ignored it. They ignored it. It was the most substantial thing that came out of that programme. It was absolutely living proof that the oral tradition can teach us things. And I'm fascinated by this, obviously. I started as a historian, but I've also been a storyteller. And it's the combination of history an oral tradition that has led to this approach. And I'm currently teaching this, a course on geomythography at the Outreach Department of Edinburgh University. So it's all very much in my head. And I'm very aware of trying to do a kind of introduction of it in an hour. It's kind of difficult because there's 20 hours of teaching going to it, and that's no enough either. But I will attempt to do my best. And the book on it, I apologise, the publisher's been a bit remiss. It's not coming out until the 27th. That's next week. And it's specifically designed to make a good Christmas present. You can see that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few sites and show you how this process actually works. Because it's a combination of looking at places, and sometimes it's actually a case of finding places. Places that have significance archaeologically, they've got stories, they've got place names, and most interestingly, actual landforms. Specific landforms, time and again, have what is clearly a history or cultural significance within the local communities. And before we start getting into it, I should emphasise that one of the key parts of the approach is localisation. It's about local places. We're so used to the notional history handed down as being big men doing big things. And it's like history comes down to it. No, that's not how it's been. That's not how it is for anybody on the planet. Things come up. This is how stories come. This is how history develops, by what people actually do. And it's only when somebody sits down and writes about it, almost always with an agenda in mind, that it actually becomes what we call history. And I have made a point over many years of teaching history to say you can't take anything for granted. You have to know what people think. It's not that they're necessarily biased. It's not that they're necessarily trying to sell you a particular version, but they've got a mindset. Everybody's got a mindset, and that colours how you interpret things. And if you happen to have the kind of train wheel mentality of the British Empire in your head, which a lot of our historians have had, you're not going to see a heck of a lot that's going on, and you're not going to recognise what was going on as well. But that critical approach also has to be taken towards the spoken word. You can't take it for granted. You have to be critical. But I'm going to give you one example of where the kind of interface between the oral tradition and scholarship can sometimes end up missing the point entirely. Right? One of the things we look at a lot in geomythography are place names. Okay? Now, those of you who've been into place names will know that the one thing that the place name specialists absolutely hate is what they call folk etymology, what the people believe. And I have a different approach to it. And I'm going to give you an example of this. And it means taking a wee bit of a pop at the great godfather of Scottish place names, William J. Watson. In William J. Watson's book on place names, he basically says that the folk etymology of the Hebrides, which is Breacher, the islands of Bride, and we'll be coming back to Bride because she was a goddess-type figure in pre-Christian thinking here, Breacher. And this is rejected totally by Watson and by everyone else who's ever studied place names at university since, because, no, the form Hebrides comes about because the Greek, or Greco-Roman, geographer Ptolemy in the 2nd century wrote a name down, and it was Ebudai, E-B-U-D-A-E. And that, because it was written down by someone who was classically educated and comes from, if you like, the respectable side of human knowledge, that has to be more important than what people themselves were telling each other. My response to that is quite simple. If people said it was Breacher, it's because they believed in Bride. Bride was a significant figure in their thinking and in their beliefs. So therefore, they believed it. And if they believed it, that's more important to me than what some pseudo-academic chap sitting in Rome wrote down who'd never been here. and was getting all his information 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th hand. But that's supposedly where we're supposed to take our knowledge base from. Well, no for me. I believe that the e-breacher thing is reflective of this belief that I should say, by the way, there's a book just been out 6 weeks ago on this. It's called Scotland's Sacred Goddess. But there is all this evidence in the landscape for this type of belief in Bride and the Cailleach. I'm not going to get totally taken away with that because that's another 20 hours. So we're not going to go that way. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at a few places and show you how we all know about Calanais, right? It's stone circle with a chamber cairn in the middle and avenues coming out from the side. The whole thing is focused on the 18.6 year cycle of the moon. The moon comes and stops. It only goes so far west and it stops and it goes back. And the main circle running down that way is focused directly on that, right? This is pretty much accepted by everybody nowadays. So it was created to do that. Now, that's great. It's significant. It also, by the way, might be quite a bit older because there it is with the stone circle, the avenue going that way. And here, down that avenue is this. It's an outcropping of rock. And that outcropping of rock, through there, the sun shines on Midsummer's Day. And the line that the sun takes was marked by a series of wooden post holes. This was noticed and forgotten. It's been reinvestigated recently. And that line goes straight up the middle of the avenue to the heart of the stone circle. How old that was, nobody knows. Because like a lot of significant places in the landscape, this appears to be natural. It's becoming recognised now that, in fact, Richard Bradley, who's a very well-known archaeologist, actually wrote a book called The Archaeology of Natural Places. And what I would suggest to you, the way to understand that is if you look at something in the landscape and it draws your attention, it's been doing that to people for thousands and thousands of years, because we're no different from the people that came before us. So this could potentially be very, very old indeed. And it could have been that the post holes there, which I didn't think have been, I don't think any material from it's been carbon dated because it was investigated before carbon dating existed. I know they're still looking into it because one of the active archaeologists there is a pal of mine, name of Stuart McHardy, no relation. But the thing about Calanais is that you've got this complex of archaeology, and this is where the moon stops every 18.6 years. And that figure, you can see, this is the head here, and the body there, is known as the Cailleach and Bride, the old woman of the Moors. Now Cailleach, it's the same word, Cailleach, crops up all over the place. We've also got several other as well. But she's called the old woman. The old woman, the Cailleach, the stories about the Cailleach are that she shaped the landscape. She made the landscape. She is the oldest being. She is quite clearly, at one point, was a goddess type figure. Because she's actually making the land. She goes about spilling her apron all the time. She was awfully careless. We'll see that. But there's all bits of, the nearest reference to that's over on the Lomond Hills. The Devil's Burdens. It's said to be the devil that dropped this great pile of rocks, but that is a motif that was well established thousands of years ago and linked to the Cailleach. The Cailleach is part of that cultural continuity. But in terms of Calanais, what is interesting is not only that the idea of the Cailleach survives, and we know about, obviously, the moon itself, but that until the early 19th century, there were still people who were known as being Nanclachan of the stones. And they were people whose job it was to light the fires at Beltane. The tradition was going well into historical times because the place had significance. It had cultural significance. Because things like the lighting of the Beltane fires, and I'll not get distracted by that because that's another 20 hours. The thing about that, this is communal activity. And one of the things that archaeologists are good at recognising is ritual activity. But when does communal activity become ritual activity? Are we drawing the right kind of differences between them? I happen to believe anything that happens where the whole community comes together over repeated time is ritual. And it's how ritual develops. And so we have stories as well at Calanais. There's a story of a magical cow. There's a story of a witch. There's a variety of stories, all of which survived into the 19th and 20th century, attached to this place that, as far as we can tell, is certainly significant round about the middle of the 4th millennium BC. And if not in Tursa, is what we think it is, or as potentially old as we think it is. It's potentially much older again. But the point is that the significance continued within the community. This is not someone that's necessarily getting picked up and written about elsewhere. This is something that people are holding on to themselves. This is something that comes with your mother's milk, if you like, when you get told it by your granny. And one of the problems we have in the modern world, well, I suppose it's understandable, but we're all educated. We're all educated through the page, the word on the page. And because of that, we have certain ways of thinking that are difficult at times to get out of. But I have come across stories that I know, because of the form of the story, date back to this Cailleach creature that I'm talking about, that have never been written down. I've also come across rituals that are taking place in Scotland annually that I've been told not to talk about. For the simple reason people say, if you put that in a book, we are going to get tourists. We didn't want tourists, this is ours. It's local. And that localisation of culture survives in many, many, many areas. And it's quite strong. And probably in this room at the moment, there are people who've got snippets of stories that they got for their parents or their grannies that, granny tell me, it's not up to very much. But it could contain remnants of what was truly, truly ancient belief. And it's worth sitting and talking about these things amongst each other. And I'm hoping that Scotland's geomythography gets out wide enough that this will encourage people to start doing that kind of thing. Start looking at what survives for us, because it's about the locale. It's the culture of communities living in the same place that is the basis of all human culture. And we have to, I think, particularly in the modern world with the way things are going, we'll have to try and get back to being more aware of where we are and the place we are. And, never mind thinking about big things. So let's think about who we are, where we are, what more can we find out? And as I say, I'm finding out lots of stuff.
Did the grandpas pass it down, or was it mainly the women folk that were telling the stories to the younger generations?
Well, it tends, for some strange reason, most of this comes down the distaff side. The great collectors of song tradition in Scotland were I going to visit all women. Because women, due to the nature of how, this idea that women, had the time to do it, it's not quite, it's not quite the case, Keeping a house is a full-time job. But the women seem to, because women are more directly involved in the upbringing of children, they are the ones that are part of this process. It's the same as the whole storytelling tradition itself. It tends to come more through the female side. And you can see it. This happened to all of you. When you were wee, right? And you first start going, blah, 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 blah. Somebody says to you, well, that's a great story. Go on, tell me a story. It encourages. This is how children become socialised. This is how they become part of the community. It's the storyteller that is fundamental to who we are and what we are. And it mainly happens when you're dealing with children. So therefore, the women tend to be the repositories of more of this stuff. Though the storytellers, Shenichies, until relatively recently, most of the evidence we've got for the traditional storytellers were they tended to be male. But over the past 100 years, and certainly over the past 50 years that I've seen myself, the storytelling tradition, particularly as it came down through the travelling people, was male and female. It's both. But overall, mainly tends to be women. The way we see the past, we've got all these constructs in our head about how we see it. And I keep on stressing to students that you've got to look at what happens, particularly in terms of ritual at significant times of the year and all the rest of it. Stop thinking about it as being mystical. Stop even thinking about it as being religious. Think about it as being practical. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. Beltane, right? May Day, everybody gets together. It's a big party. It's a party. But it was only a few years ago that we began to realise there's something else going on. And there's an old Gaelic phrase describing someone who kind of make up their mind as being caught between the fires of Beltane. And it was looking at that and at the woods that were used in the fires that someone came to light. What happened at Beltane was that cattle were driven between two fires. So they were getting drenched with smoke. One of the woods that was in the Beltane fires was juniper. Florence Nightingale was still burning juniper in her hospitals in the Crimea because it's antiseptic. Cattle have been kept indoor all over the winter. They come out at Beltane, they've got ticks and all the rest of it. This was getting rid of the ticks, drenching them in juniper smoke. Practical. Part of the necessity of dealing with the life you're in. But because it's part of a bigger thing, and you do this as a community, it takes on the aspect of being ritual, and therefore we see it as being necessarily sacred. Possibly, but not necessarily. But we do have wee markers, just wee markers in Scotland. This is the Ballachulish Goddess, discovered in 1880, just at the end of Glencoe there, and it's alder wood. They think the wood might be even older than it itself, and there's some debate, but it could have originated certainly back in the Iron Age, and it's a goddess. So, we can think it was a Cailleach, but that is only part of the story, because if we take the geomythographical approach, it's found here. Next to it, 100 yards away, great big rock covered in rock art. Okay, quite interesting. Further over here, a standing stone with a hole in it. That hole has a horseshoe in it, and the locals go along every so often still to make sure that it's the right way up. Also, we have the Pap of Glencoe. Now, Paps are mountains and hills that are shaped like young women's breasts. And the majority of them that I've investigated in Scotland are surrounded by evidence of ritual activity and archaeology. They are matched, by the way, by Mam as a place name. Mam is a more rounded hill, that's the Mamos up there, all of them, the Mamos, including Beinn Bheithir. And the way I interpret that is that Mams represent women once they've given birth, and a Pap is a woman who has not yet given birth. And this also corresponds to the Cailleach, who we've talked about, who was representative of winter, death to some extent, and in one particularly graphic poem, Féar Gael, she's presented having one leg, one eye, and one tooth. So she's not somebody you want to meet back from the pub. But the Cailleach, in other stories, goes to the well, the significant well. And these stories are all told locally, so they all happen locally. And she drinks of the water on Beltane morning before the sun has come up, and she turns into bride. We've got a clear duality. And this story comes from a couple of places. Also, I've been going about noting where we get Cailleachs and Bride together in the landscape, and there's a lot of instances of that, again, along with significant place names and very often sites of ritual activity and/or significant archaeology. But around about here, we've also got Beinn Bheithir, which is just in the corner here. And there's the story, famous story of the dragon. And it's the same as most of the dragon stories. The dragon is driving a wee daft by eating up all the cattle, and some hero comes along and sorts it out. In this case, his name is Charles the Skipper. But in cosmological terms, the dragon is usually, stories about the dragon and the hero are usually presented as referring to the idea of bringing order out of chaos, with the specific Christian overlay through the stories of St. Michael and others, that it's the defeat of paganism. So these dragons have all got significance. And just in passing, I'm going to mention one other one, just north of Dundee, because the dragon there killed 9 sisters. And the 9 sisters are linked in story to Arthurian mythology, Norse mythology, Welsh mythology, Breton mythology, Korean mythology, Greek mythology, Kenyan mythology, and I've got traces of it in Japan, the South Seas, virtually worldwide. Again, a very, very ancient idea that survived locally, told of a story about a Pictus stone in Dundee, but is actually universal. And there's a book about that as well, just, you know. And the book about the 9 maidens links into the book of the goddess, which links into this one. I didn't realise that until somebody told me 3 weeks ago. You've written a trilogy. I'm so busy writing it. I hadn't bothered. Right. So these are all the sites round about. There's a standing stone. There's where the actual figure was found. This is Beinn Bheithir here. The island there is the Isle of, it's the Isle of discussion, where people want to talk things out. Very early church site, part of Glencoe itself. 2 mountains in Glencoe, one called a Cailleach, the other one called not Bride, but Bodach, the old man. Because in most mythological constructs, what you've got, at some point, you've got the male and the female. And we have very, 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 very faint story remnants that may refer to the Bodach and the Cailleach on Glen Nevis. But what we do have is, again, instances in the landscape where the Bodach and the Cailleach are together like this. We've also got a mountain called a Cailleach, the island of milk. Well, I'm not absolutely sure about that because the name has changed so much. We've got another on Bodach here. Up here we've got a hill called Nagrugachin. Nagrugach was a female spirit. And there's other stuff. But you can see within the area that there is all of this stuff that's relating back to this type of understanding of the world. And it's the fact that the stories survive into the modern world, yet the ideas underpinning them are so ancient that it's significant. And that's Beinn Bheithir, which is a great quarry. Quarry, for those of you who like to go up into the hills, effectively equates to cauldron. And what are cauldrons associated with? Fertility. Because behind the witches is this older mythological stuff. And the cauldrons in all of the Celtic languages, cauldrons are very much a symbol of fertility, and Corrie has that connotation. It's like a lot of things though, you have to be careful about. And in geomythography, I insist on people understanding clustering. Clustering is when you get these different types of material coming together to reinforce each other, but they're coming from totally different places. Like the archaeology is different from the place names, which is different from the stories, which is different from the landforms. But if you get a gathering together of these things, you found some place that is significant. It's not just that you go and say, oh look, there's a place name, oh, that must be that. No, you have to be critical, you have to be aware. And if you get a cluster of these different types of material around about a place, you've got a place that was extremely significant in the culture of the local community. And these are the key words. The culture of the local community. Now, I've mentioned Paps. These are the Paps of Jura. And the Paps of Jura are interesting for a whole load of reasons. One of them is that there's 3. And it's not the only one. There's another three-breasted significant site in the borders of the Eildon Hills. But if you actually approach from virtually every angle, you just see two. So the visual impact is always of the two breasts, right? In Shanty, the Holy Mountain, then in Alloa, the Hill of God. And there are various stories associated with these. One of the best ones, I suppose, is on the side of this running down to the water, to the edge of the ocean. There's a thing called Scríomh na Cailleach. Scríomh means scrape. And the story goes there that the Cailleach who lived up there had fallen in love with a local lad called McPhee. And she was keeping him prisoner, and he kept on trying to get away, and she kept on bringing him back. Every time he got on his boat and rowed away, she'd just throw her magic clue of wool, and he'd catch the boat and she'd pull him back in and say, "Oh, there. Until one day he realised that her axe could cut the magic clue. And so he stole the axe before he got in the boat, and he's rowing away, and she's holding and pulling and all the rest. "Ah, McPhee, you know you're coming back, you know you're coming back. And he just keeps on rowing, and she gets dragged down the side of the hill, and you can still see it. You'll see it on the maps. The Scríomh is there. It's a massive, great scar in the rock. And then when she gets down near the bottom, just up, and he's away. Now, we also have a group of 7 women, who I think this one now, are thrown over the top by another hero. We've got loads and loads of place names, other stories about McPhee, and of course, we've got something else at the top of Jura.
Corrievreckan.
The Corrievreckan, yeah. Which there are various stories about, and I'm not going to go into them because, like you say, some of the stuff can go on for an awfully long time. But suffice it to say that within living memory, fishermen have referred to the Corrievreckan whirlpool as the breath of the goddess under the waves. Because in one of the oldest stories, which I only was told 5 or 6 years ago by the great Shenike Speirs Centre, she actually was tricked and falls into the water, and her body is Scarba, which is her nose, Jura, which has the Paps, and Isla. And because she was the oldest, she's a giant, but although she is this great, massive, supernaturally powerful creature, the Atlantic Ocean is too much for her, so she's kept there. But the Corrievreckan whirlpool is her breathing. So you have a story there that's not just directly linked to the third biggest whirlpool on the planet that none of you heard about at school. I wonder why. But it lives on. It's one of these stories that is still told. People tell it. It's never gone away. And it's about the making of the planet. It's about mythology. This is not fanciful stuff made up for stories. This is mythology. This is how people are rooted in the world. And one of the things that has become obvious, to me anyway, over the past few years, and I've been working with an archaeoastronomer in terms of looking at sites and all the rest of it, and he had come totally separately from me to the same conclusion that what we're dealing with so often through the folklore of ancient sites is we're dealing with what are effectively memories of the ancestors. In anthropology, since the 19th century, there's been a tendency amongst highly educated people particularly from the West, to go and look at what they think of as primitive cultures and say, oh yes, we found clear evidence of ancestor worship. That's not what it is at all. This isn't my idea, this is Margaret Bennett, a great folklorist and marvellous singer, who was at the School of Scottish Studies while it was still allowed to live. And she said, look, we've got to stop thinking about that. It's about respect. respect can look very much like reverence, but it's about respect and the ancestors. And we know that we're now quite sure that the ideas of the fairies, ideas of the hollow hills where people get lured into, a whole series of stuff in folklore is basically about the ancestors. And the reason for that is simple. Think back to the world where you don't have any writing, where everything that you are going to learn in your life is going to be told to you through story or shown you by example. You get the stories. Who gives you the stories? Your parents, your grandparents. Who did they get it from? Their parents, their grandparents. Who did they get it from? Their parents and grandparents, i.e. the ancestors. These are the ones that that cleared the land for you. These are the ones that give you the knowledge of how to deal with the seasons, how to deal with the crops, how to deal with the animals, how to deal with the weather. They hand this down to you. You are in incredible debt to your ancestors. And the other thing in the pre-literate world is time is seen differently. And people within communities like that are aware not only of the inheritance that they've got from the ancestors, but also that they too will be ancestors themselves in time, because they see themselves as part of the continuum. And it's a kind of awareness of the world that is, well, I don't think we've lost it entirely, but it's quite difficult for us to comprehend just how all-encompassing this was. And it accounts for ideas like the chamber tombs, which you find a lot of chamber tombs in Scotland, and in them, it used to be, of course, these were big chiefs and warriors had been put in there. You know, that's what that was about. No, they found that what they were multiple burials, and what they had was the skulls and the thigh bones of different individuals. And archaeologists have been suggesting that what probably happened at these was that however these individuals were chosen to go in there, and we do not know, they may very well have been brought out at significant times of the year, probably Halloween soon, and they'd be involved in a ritual. And one of the suggestions is that what they're doing is that people are talking to their ancestors to try and make sure that they use their influence, because they are not only in the other world, they're also in the earth. Even the ones whose skulls and thigh bones have survived. The rest of them's in the earth. And the idea is that it's kind of what you refer to as magical thinking, that they may well have been speaking to them and asking them to make sure that the crops would grow again next year, that summer would come again next year, because we've all seen Scotland when the summer didn't come at all, but that they are speaking to the ancestors, because one of the things about traditional belief is that Halloween, they can come back. They're gone. They're living in another world, but they're not totally disappeared. And this whole complex of ideas is tied around this notion of respect for the ancestors. And I think that the awareness that you too are going to be an ancestor yourself would have led to an attitude towards how you deal with the planet and with other human beings that would again be beneficial to the community. Because underlying all of this stuff is the fact that people lived in these small communities. They're related to communities, down the road and over the river. They are related to other communities, but they all exist within small communities. And the responsibility within that is tied in with all of these beliefs. The other side of Jura, I mentioned the Cailleach and Bride, and the stories of the Cailleach turning to Bride. You also find a few instances like that where we've got the Cailleach at the south end and Bride names at the top. And here at the bottom, this is Craigshouse Bay on the east coast of Jura, a lovely place. But there's half a dozen different Cailleach names around here. There's the Pass of the Cailleach, the Point of the Cailleach, the Mill of the Cailleach, and something else. Because I spend so much time looking at sites, and a great deal of time is spent on maps Do you all know about the National Library of Scotland's georeference map site? Well, those of you who don't go. It becomes addictive. It really is. They've got all the maps. They've got they've got the early maps. They've got the point maps. They've got the Blow maps. But then they've got Roy's maps from the 1740s, and then all of the Ordnance Survey maps up till about 40 years ago. And you can flip between them, in and out. And it really, I mean, seriously, you go on, I'll just have a look at this, you know. Oh, that was an hour ago. You know, it is absolutely, you know, it can get really kind of addictive. But here we have these names in this. And Elan Vreacher, the Point of Bride, and there's other names there on Laverstone maps. But down here at the bottom, this is something that I noticed just a couple of years ago. It crops up time and time again near sites that have all the markers of having been significant in belief and ritual. And that is the term loshkte. You have any Gaelic speakers? Right, loshkte, it means burnt. And I suspect it's the same as Bruntland and Burntland that we've got. And because I know that a lot of these ritual sites were the sites of fires at Beltane and Halloween, is this yet another marker? We don't know, it hasn't been investigated yet, but this is the type of idea that comes from approaching places through this geomythographical filter, I suppose. And I suspect a lot of them are remnants of that, and so therefore, from my point of view, I now include that as part of clustering, even though I haven't proved it yet. And to use a good Scottish term, see Scotland. See history in that. Poaching. It absolutely is. And here's another one. Bennachie. Now, Bennachie, if you're from Aberdeen, and I just want to make the point, by the way, that the whole notion of Doric, I have a lot of problems with it, because fit like a start at Farfar. And if you've any doubt about that, I've got this pal, Farry's phase, no Farfar, but it's no Farfar Farfar. And it actually stops between Farfar and Kirriemuir, so it's no just Aberdeen, you know. But Bennachie, if you're from Aberdeenshire, Bennachie is part of your being. It's one of these places that is, you know, it's like the Sleeping Warrior of Arran for people in the West. And by the way, Sleeping Warrior of Arran is a reclining female figure. I've got the proof of that here as well. But Bennachie has a marker on it. It's Mithertap. Now, which Mither is that, would you think? And people have been asking me for quite a long time, do you think it was initially Mither Pap? And I would love to say aye, but I don't have evidence. But it's also got a whole complex of building. And it's marked on the map, as are most of these constructs, as a hill fort. Nah, they're not hill forts. Some of them may, at some point during their existence, have been used defensively, but go and check one out. I'm not talking about the dunes in the west, but over here. Go and walk around a big hill fort, and every 6 feet, add another number. That's the number of men you need for it to function as a defensive structure. You need a man every 6 feet. And the numbers that then turn out, would the local population have that many effective warriors? It's a wee bit dubious. The other thing is, if you go and look at an awful lot of them, they've got several entrances. Some of them have got no wells. And many years ago, my father and I went to one of the biggest ones, the White Catterton, north of Brechin, and he was an engineer. And we did a series of rough calculations, and the walls are pretty down, but they used to supposedly be, you know, at least 10 foot high. And we figured out how long it would take to build that. Even if the population back in the Iron Age, when we think it went up, was the same as it is now, it would have taken them 10 to 15 years. Think about that. There's hundreds of these across Scotland. And they all took 10 to 15 years to build. Now, if this was all triggered by the supposed, the numpties, the Romans coming in or something, no, it doesn't make sense. Or any other kind of invasion. You can't throw up these types of structures overnight. And if they are being defensively created, you would think are responsive to something, and it doesn't make sense. Also doesn't make sense when you think of that Scotland has the most perfect defensive structure ever, which could be built in a season. That's the Bodach. We have them. So these hill forts, for a whole series of reasons, are very unlikely. Well, they're certainly not just hill forts, i.e. defensive military structures. And this is, by the way, this is not heresy. This is becoming accepted within archaeological circles. People are really looking at this. I'm going to go slightly off piste here. We'll have to talk about this one first. Oh, right. I'll finish with this. Head of Glen Lyon. Right? This glen here, which goes round with the Moor River and goes into what is now the reservoir of Loch Lyon. The glen is Glen Cailleach. Okay? And here, on the map, is Tigh and Bodach, which is also known as Tigh and Cailleach. And to this day, at Beltane, somebody goes and they go to the Tigh house, and it's about slightly longer than that, and it's modelled on a traditional Scottish black house, right? And every Beltane, it is re-roofed, and the three stones representing the Cailleach, the Bodach, and the daughter, who would be bride, are brought out and put at the front. They're taken back in at Serene. This has been noted for quite a long time and is considered probably the last true pagan ritual taking place, not just in Scotland, but possibly northwestern Europe. And I know that it's still taking place because I was asked to take over as the keeper 10 years ago. Luckily I didn't have to because it's a long way from where I be. But someone else, it was a local shepherd, I don't know who's taking over now. But this Tigh and Bodach is quite clearly, it's pre-Christian, right? There's no way it can be. And the ritual has survived. Again, it's about the survival. But overlooking it on the side of this mountain, Cailleach, the Paps, up here a bit, there's a Sheehan. And if you see the name Sheehan, it basically translates as fairy mound. And some of the Sheehans are barrows, tumuli, chamber cairns, and the like. Others are natural, but they've been called Sheehans because obviously people tell the stories about Sheehans. And these are the places where fiddlers and pipers get lured in, and are either there for a year or 100 years, and they come out and happy steed. These kind of stories. And down where the river goes into the loch, there was an area which is now flooded called Stang in the Cailleach. And Stang, on the mundane level, is just kind of boggy area, but it has an older meaning in Gaelic, which is actually sacred enclosure. So we're dealing with something quite significant. And I've been talking about this and using photographs of it for years. Still never been there for some strange reason. But if you go up the Glen, and you go over the Glen into Och Glen, there's a whole series of other things. Early church sites, Sheehans, place names, the whole thing. And all of this is in the shadow of Beinn Bheithir, which has a very, very powerful kind of resonance, particularly within Gaelic culture. And what we're looking at is, again, one of these areas where the imprint of what was clearly belief has gone into a selected place in the landscape. There's the Stan Cailleach area there. And the only reason to know about that, georeference maps. Go and looking at one map, go and looking at the other maps, and then go and getting any kind of map you can of an area, because whoever did the maps, until it becomes totally organised in the mid-19th century, people have got different ideas of what they should be picking up. But also, when you go through it, the actual place names that were gathered, particularly in the late 18th century, some of them were quite rude, because the locals knew fine who these, the army were coming around and asking, and they were telling them this god awful lies. So you have to be careful with what you look at. But there's all these different types of information that you can access, right? So I'll finish with one thing. You can use maps. You can go to the collections of stories. You can also go through, there's a couple of books on Scottish topography, which you can access for free on archive.org, which is a wonderful resource. It's basically started in Chicago, and they're trying to get every out of copyright book on the planet on the site so you can access it. So you can access, go and just look for anything. And it's got all kinds of modern stuff, films and music as well, but I just look at the old books. But it's a brilliant thing. And if you use that in conjunction with local histories, because a lot of local histories, particularly that were written in the early 19th century, written by the local minister, and he knows stuff that somebody coming from another part of the country wouldn't know about, and quite often he puts down wee bits and pieces that are not of particular interest to him, but might just jump out of the page at you, because it's happened to me. And one of them, which I've not had time to go and look at yet, I was looking at local history. I can't even remember which one, because we looked at a couple in the locals. And it says on the back road coming down at the east side of the Myatt from Sheriff Muir, if you look up on the hill, there's the shape of a reclining human. I've not been up to check yet. But what I have found is that I can put forward a case for every reclining figure that I've found in the Scottish landscape as being female. And that female is the Cailleach.
That's wonderful.
Oh, well, that was absolutely fascinating. Really looking forward to reading the whole book, which is on my Christmas list. Thanks so much to Stuart McHardy for letting us film his session. Thanks also to the Speirs Centre for putting on the event. And thanks to my co-host Lynn for standing in for Marlene on this Clackmannanshire edition. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.